History has a way of feeling fateful. Epic stories with a grand sweep that feel like they could have only gone one way. More often than you know, it's actually just stupid people making terrible decisions.
What just happened? I don't know.
In April 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor on the northernmost edge of the then Soviet Ukraine suffered a dramatic malfunction, spewing radioactive debris over portions of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, and sending lighter particles as far away as Scandinavia. The disaster seemed emblematic of the teetering late-era Soviet state, especially as reports later showed that the power plant had been poorly designed and staffed with undertrained technicians.
We did everything right.
In short, the nuclear reactor that generated power at Chernobyl was designed in a way that meant that even relatively limited damage could bring down the whole shebang. When workers turned off an automated shutdown mechanism to test how long the machines would run if power was lost, it set off a chain reaction that led to the core melting down, which led to 2 major explosions. 2 people were killed immediately, perhaps more, as the Soviet government was never known for admitting its mistakes, with more dying of radiation poisoning in the following weeks and an unknowable number suffering radiation exposure.
In terms of radiation, I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest X-ray.
The nearby town of Pripyat was evacuated and abandoned. But true to brand, the Soviets only copped to the disaster when Swedish air monitors noticed high radiation levels.
Is it too much to ask that you all know what you're doing?
Well, yes, absolutely.
A later report largely blamed the training of Chernobyl workers for the disaster. It said, in effect, that they'd done something stupid but had been following the rules as they knew them. Austria-Hungary governed Bosnia and Herzegovina from 1878, but only fully incorporated it in 1908, which led to hurt feelings and high tensions all around. So in June 1914, the heir to Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Duchess Sophie visited the capital of the sort of new territory, Sarajevo, to try to build some goodwill. It didn't go great. At 10 a.m. on the morning of June 28th, a would-be assassin threw a bomb at the royal car. Franz Ferdinand himself swatted it away, leaving the couple unharmed but injuring people in the convoy behind them. The Archduke and his wife, rattled but aware of their duty, soldiered on with the day. Unfortunately for peace in Europe, the couple later insisted on changing their schedule to visit one of the injured from their entourage in the hospital. The narrow, confusing old streets of downtown Sarajevo led to congestion and a wrong turn that put them at a dead stop right in front of one of the original bomb throwers' co-conspirators, a 20-year-old Serb nationalist named Gavrilo Princip.
I knew this was the wrong way.
I mean, the next left.
Stop arguing, we're sitting ducks here. Get this car moving, now!
Seizing the opportunity, Princip fired at the Archduke and the Duchess, killing them both. A month later, a furious Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia. The whole system of European defense alliances activated and World War I was on. Edward IV, King of England during the dynastic merry-go-round of the War of the Roses, married Elizabeth Woodville in secret in May 1465. Why in secret? Well, she wasn't seen as Queen of England material. Sure, she was connected to the aristocracy through her mother, and she was said to be extremely pretty. She already had children from a first marriage, so she was fertile, a virtual requirement for a queen even today, but the queenly prerequisites ended there. In the con column, Elizabeth's father was a nobody. He'd actually been a squire before marriage. Her first husband had died fighting for the Lancastrians. And if you don't have your 15th century scorecard handy, Edward IV was the opposing Yorkist claimant to the throne, which arguably made Elizabeth a traitor's widow.
He was the leader of the Lancastrian cavalry. They killed 700 of our men. He nearly ran you through it.
That's bad enough, but it's not all. Elizabeth didn't come to the marriage with foreign alliances or cold hard cash, and the crowning blow, pun absolutely intended, was that her mom was thought to be a witch. We're not saying that made Elizabeth witchy or that that's necessarily a bad thing, but some people really didn't like it.
I am not happy about this marriage.
That's a shame. We're all delighted.
The marriage and the sudden social elevation of the previously obscure Woodville family annoyed any number of people at the English court, especially the Earl of Warwick.
Lord Warwick looks as though he swallowed poison.
Warwick had been arranging a marriage for Edward and now had to explain to the French court that the prince he'd offered was now married to an older woman no one had ever heard of. This pissed Warwick off so much that he switched sides, offering his services to the Lancastrians, which led to years more war and the brief return of Edward IV's rival, Henry VI, to the throne in 1470. Many of Elizabeth Woodville's relatives would die in the continuing war, but her daughter, also named Elizabeth, eventually married Henry VII, becoming queen herself. So answer me this, which won in the end? In 1840, representatives of the 125,000-odd Maori and the 2,000 or so settlers living in New Zealand signed the Treaty of Waitangi. In theory, it was supposed to protect the rights of the Maori, establish guidelines for trade and missionary activities, and keep other nations from poking around the country. in theory. In reality, the British inked an English language version that didn't quite mean the same thing as a Maori language version. Was this an accident? Good question. The treaty had 3 articles, and the last 2 had major translation issues. Check your work, people. Because thanks to lack of proofreading, or maybe due to bad intentions, the British version of the treaty gives the British government sovereign control over Maori lands. But the Maori translation says the British were just being permitted to use the land, not rule it. Big difference. Big problem. The disparity led to a bunch of 19th century wars fought over land rights, and even though attempts were made to clarify the treaty in 1975, it didn't get done, and the problems continue to this day. You may never need this advice, but just in case, if you're married to an extraordinarily rich, adventurous woman with her own power base, try not to annoy her. That's a mistake made by Louis VII of France, who so irritated Eleanor of Aquitaine that she divorced him, then took herself and her provinces into the young, handsome, energetic arms of Louis's rival, Henry II of England. As a child, Eleanor had inherited the sprawling, prosperous Duchy of Aquitaine in southwestern France, and because she was rich and pretty, she married the heir to the French throne, which should have made everyone happy. But Eleanor was also very smart, and she knew it, which probably made things more complicated and annoying for her as a woman during medieval times.
A knife! He's got a knife! Of course he has a knife. He always has a knife. We all have knives. It's 1183 and we're barbarians.
Eleanor went places. She and Louis actually went on crusade together after Louis became king. This resulted in few military successes and one terrific argument over whether or not to attack Edessa. Eleanor wanted to, Louis didn't. The couple kept fighting after their return to France, eventually having their marriage dissolved by the Pope. Eleanor was only 30 and would take Aquitaine with her to her next marriage. For that project, she chose Henry, Count of Anjou, who at his cousin's death would be King of England. Henry and Eleanor famously fought too, to the point where Henry put her in prison for rebellion for a number of years.
How dear of you to let me out of jail.
It's only for the holidays.
Still, Eleanor bore him 8 children, among them 2 kings of England, Richard the Lion-Hearted and the far less impressive King John of Robin Hood fame. Eleanor also gave the English crown some of her lands in France, which would lead to centuries of war between the heirs of her first husband and the descendants of her second. Middle Ages or not, Eleanor of Aquitaine made her mark. The Korean War was going well for the US and South Korea in the autumn of 1950. Seoul had been cleared of North Korean forces. They were being chased toward the Chinese frontier, where the Americans and South Koreans expected to pin them down at the Yalu River, which defines the Chinese border. The Chinese were concerned about what General MacArthur was up to. Was he going to chase the North Koreans to the river or into China itself? China issued an ultimatum. If the US and its allies approached the Yalu River, China would intervene. President Harry Truman and his advisors warned MacArthur to back off. The last thing Truman wanted was a long and costly war against the Chinese-backed communist force at the edge of China itself. But MacArthur was known for his hubris. He bullied Truman into ignoring the Chinese warning, betting that China, who just finished fighting their own civil war, wouldn't involve itself directly, and so MacArthur charged toward the river. As for war-wearied China, they involved themselves directly. Egged on by Stalin, the Chinese invaded Korea on October 25, 1950. As a result, the war, which had been so nearly over, lasted until 1953, cost over 2.5 million lives, and ended in a Korea divided to this day. Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria and Empress Elizabeth had 2 daughters and 1 son, and once the boy arrived, Elizabeth closed up the baby shop. Given that this son, Rudolf, would theoretically inherit the throne, his marriage was profoundly important. He needed a suitable empress and sons of his own to continue the Habsburg line.
The dynasty is all that counts. Complete the circle, Rudolf. Stop losing time. Get married.
What Rudolf got was Stephanie of Belgium. She was the daughter of King Leopold of Belgium, who had become fabulously rich via shipping, railways, and other investments, only to get even richer by ravaging the Congo. Stephanie and Rudolf were a terrible match. She was physically plain, which annoyed Rudolf, as well as less blue-blooded than her new family and apparently unpleasant and prudish. Rudolf was spoiled, emotional, and promiscuous. He even infected his wife with a venereal disease he contracted running around with other women. Stephanie's consolation was that she enjoyed being crowned princess, dressing up and going to events, but that was taken from her when Rudolf and a mistress died in a mysterious murder-suicide. Stephanie was the last adult in the family to be told. And since the two had only one child, a daughter, the throne passed to Franz Ferdinand, a nephew of the emperor, the guy who made that fatal wrong turn and ended up dead, kicking off World War I. He too made a consequential match, not in a good way. He married a minor noble, a mere duchess, which meant their children were also barred from the throne, but it didn't matter that much. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was on its last legs, dissolving in 1918 at the end of World War I. We can all agree that kids love toys, right? Sounds obvious, unless you were an event organizer at England's Victoria Hall circa 1883. It started simply enough with a variety show that packed the theater with around 1,000 children. And it was all going great until someone shouted out, "Free toys!" This is the very definition of the word mistake. The kids surged forward as soon as the announcement was made. They jumped from their seats, packed aisles, blocked staircases, and were crushed against the doors. By the time it was over, 183 children were dead. This tragedy led to an invention you use all the time, the push-bar emergency exit. It took years for it to be installed in buildings around the world, and other similar tragedies would happen in the meantime, but those 183 children ultimately helped save the lives of countless others. In 1999, the Kuwaiti cabinet gave women the right to vote and even run for parliament in the historically patriarchal society. But did they realize what they were doing? It happened because of typos in the Quran. Stick with this, it's complicated. Earlier in the year, the Minister for Islamic Affairs came under scrutiny when it was discovered that his state-sanctioned print run of the Quran contained errors and misprints. He was accused of doing it on purpose to try to discredit the Muslim faith. This sent the government into turmoil, and Sheikh Jabbar al-Ahmed al-Sabah responded by dissolving parliament and calling for elections. Those elections gave liberal candidates the opportunity to step forward. Liberal and Islamic candidates took a staggering number of seats and immediately started advocating for reforms to advance women's rights, as well as to curtail political corruption and public funds mismanagement. Amid all the turmoil, women got the vote in 2005. And it all started because someone couldn't be bothered to give the state-sanctioned version of the Quran a final read-through before publishing it. After 3 marital strikes, 1 annulment, and 2 widowhoods, Margaret of Austria was reassigned in 1507. Instead of being a pawn in the royal marriage market, she would now govern the Habsburg Netherlands, a chunk of today's Low Countries that her father, the Holy Roman Emperor, was too busy to rule himself. Margaret was good at it, too. She maintained the region's alliance with England and expanded the family's control into adjacent provinces. She was a noted patron of the arts and a skilled diplomat. She and Louise Savoy, mother of the King of France, successfully negotiated what was called the Ladies' Peace of 1529, at a time when women were not considered qualified to do anything of the sort. She was a political rock star. But in 1530, when she was 50 years old, she stepped on a piece of glass. Reports about what happened next aren't completely consistent. Either an infection developed, or everyone in those pre-antibiotic days was afraid it would. Gangrene was universally fatal, so Margaret agreed to an amputation, but she died during the operation. She was succeeded by another shrewd woman, Mary of Hungary. Mary's rule was followed almost immediately by a generations-long war for Dutch independence from the Habsburg crown. Had Margaret been wearing hard-soled shoes, decades of war might have played out differently, and the Dutch might be speaking German today. Bolivia, alone in South America, has neither a coastline nor access to a navigable river route to the sea. This has stifled economic growth and led to the creation of many Spanish-language memes, especially given that Bolivia had a perfectly respectable coastline until the early 1880s. Bolivia once controlled a portion of the central Pacific coast of South America, between Peru and Chile. This territory had valuable nitrate deposits, which can be made into fertilizer or explosives depending on whether people are hungry or angry. A complex system of treaties allowed Chile, backed by British companies, to mine in the territory, and boy did they mine. This understandably made Bolivia and Peru uneasy to the point where Peru confiscated the Chilean mining interests' assets in Peru. Bolivia was then inspired to break some of its treaty obligations to Chile, levying new taxes and threatened to confiscate their Bolivian assets. Chile retaliated immediately, first taking the port of Antofagasta, then declaring a broader war against a Bolivian-Peruvian alliance. It wasn't even close. Chile controlled the seas, blockaded Peru, and captured Lima, while the Bolivian state was too inept to really challenge Chilean control of Antofagasta. The war ended in 1883 with Chile in control of the former Bolivian coastline. Later treaties allowed Bolivia duty-free imports and exports through Antofagasta and nearby Arica, but emotionally or economically, they've been landlocked ever since. The Inca Empire was huge and powerful, with complex internal transit networks and the energy of a young state. But the conquistador Pizarro toppled it with an initial force of under 300 men. He got an assist from smallpox, which arrived a few years before Pizarro and killed, among many others, the Inca king, leading to a war between 2 of his sons for the throne. The victor of the civil war was Atahualpa, who then made a fatal mistake. The Spanish had been active in modern-day Ecuador since 1528, but the Inca government postponed addressing them. They had to mop up their civil war and take care of some religious rituals first. Besides, there were only a few hundred foreigners, no real threat to the children of the sun. Finally, Atahualpa agreed to meet Pizarro and his men at the city of Cajamarca in 1532. He brought along some of his 80,000-man army, but not all of it. Big mistake. The day after Pizarro and Atahualpa's first official meeting, the better-armed Spanish launched a sneak attack, killing 7,000 of the Inca army while claiming to have taken no losses. They captured Atahualpa and held him for ransom, but once they got paid, they murdered him and proceeded south to smash and loot the remains of the Inca state. In the late autumn of 1120, King Henry I of England and William Adelin were in Barfleur on the Norman coast, preparing to return to England. Henry took his own ship home, but William and the various young courtiers present decided to take the White Ship, a super-fast vessel for the time owned by a local captain, Thomas Fitzstephen. In the hours before they were to sail, most of them got absolutely hammered. History doesn't record whether the captain himself was drinking or merely surrounded by very rich, very boisterous, very drunk people, but neither situation boded well for the crossing. With William and his crew encouraging him to go fast to try to beat the king home, Fitzstephen charged into the English Channel and hit a submerged rock, a known hazard called the Kiwabuff. The ship went down quickly. Luckily, William Adelin made it into a lifeboat. Unluckily, it sank when he tried to turn back to save his half-sister. Everyone died except for a butcher from Rouen. Word was that the captain let himself drown when he realized the gravity of the accident. With William dead, the heir was now Henry's daughter, Matilda, who was the Holy Roman Empress at the time, but also, unfortunately for the time, a woman. When Henry died, Matilda and her cousin Stephen would fight for the English throne in a 19-year-long slugfest remembered by history as the Anarchy, or occasionally the Shipwreck. The French Revolution was a bloody period in France's past where lots of unrest led to lots of use of the guillotine.
Look at that bad boy. Isn't that a beaut?
King Louis XVI took a final trip to the dreaded device in 1793. Marie Antoinette followed a few months later, and France changed forever. Their deaths kicked off the Reign of Terror and led to thousands of executions and the rise of Napoleon. But here's the thing, they didn't need to die at all, and probably wouldn't have if Louis XVI hadn't made a whole series of dumb decisions. It started when thousands of people stormed the Bastille in July of 1789 looking for weapons. In October, they captured the royals, but they weren't locked up. Louis and Marie Antoinette both could have walked out the door any time, but they simply didn't. It wasn't until around 2 years later that they finally snuck out, but despite having years to plan, they planned their escape pretty impractically. They traveled together in a large, conspicuous wagon laden with things like a complete dinner service and wine chest, and Louis sent away the one person who probably could have helped them, his wife's lover, Count Axel Fersen. Not surprisingly, the royals were captured again after being easily recognized along the way, thanks in part to poor disguises and the fact that they loved to socialize.
It's not too much, is it?
No.
Then Fersen organized an escape with the help of Sweden's king, broke into the palace, and hung out with Marie for a day until Louis sent him away again. Following some other ups and downs, the king was sent to the guillotine about a year later. Erwin Rommel is a fascinating figure, one of Nazi Germany's most prolific commanders and someone the International Churchill Society has called a thoroughly decent man, mostly for his tendency to ignore many of Hitler's most horrible orders. He was a brilliant general and briefly headed a unit nicknamed the Ghost Division because it was so fast, so targeted, and so efficient. He was also supposed to be in Normandy for D-Day. In the days leading up to the Allied invasion on the mainland's coast, he went deer hunting, and he also went to Paris to buy shoes for his wife's birthday. After looking at the tide tables and the approaching storms, he decided the Allies probably weren't going to attempt a channel crossing in such unfavorable conditions. Instead of staying on what would very, very quickly become the front lines of the war, he headed home to Germany for his wife's June 6th birthday. The LA Times says he was at his country house in Germany when he heard about the invasion happening hours away. He got to Normandy as quickly as he could, but one of Germany's most prolific generals was essentially taken out of the action to attend a birthday party. The fall of the Berlin Wall was one of the defining moments of the 80s, and it only happened because of two easily avoidable mistakes. Tensions were already at a breaking point, and in November 1989, East Berlin Politburo members decided they needed to make some concessions if they wanted to keep anything resembling peace. They took to the airwaves to make an announcement that was supposed to say that there would be an ever-so-slight relaxation of travel rules, but that they would retain the right to deny anyone passage at any time. The press conference was completely botched, though, and the reading of the announcement was garbled save a few phrases, including that free travel would be, quote, possible for every citizen right away immediately. Chaos quickly followed. The second mistake was even more insane. When thousands of people converged on border crossings they thought were open, Stasi officer Harold Jaeger called for backup somewhere around 30 times in a single night. When his superiors didn't believe him about the mess he was facing and at one point called him, quote, simply a coward, Jaeger kicked open the doors, allowed people to pass both ways, and started the real fall of the Berlin Wall. All because his superiors made the stupid mistake of underestimating just how much of their garbage he was willing to take. In 1977, New York City lost all electricity for 25 hours, and the consequences were devastating. Around 800,000 people were reportedly stranded in the subways and elevators, while others set to looting and pillaging on a medieval scale. There were about 1,000 fires set, more than 1,500 businesses were looted, and by the time the lights came back on, there were damages that cost about $1 billion. Also, some have credited the blackouts as the catalyst that sparked the hip-hop movement, which is a nice bonus. And it all happened because someone didn't know what buttons to push.
I am Groot.
Uh-huh.
I am Groot.
That's right.
I am Groot.
No! No, that's the button that will kill everyone!
Schneider Electric looked at just what happened on that hot summer night in '77, and it started with a few lightning strikes. That's not uncommon, they say, and most substations are prepared for it. This one wasn't. After lightning tripped the breakers, Con Ed tried to restart the station's generators. The problem? No one was there. When employees finally got there and started running system-wide procedures to get everything back up and running, they ran the wrong procedures. Instead of dumping the necessary 1,500 megawatts of load, they ran one that got rid of only a few hundred. The station shut down and the Big Apple went dark. About 17% of the US viewing audience watched the Challenger disaster live in 1986, and it was a horrifying moment that shaped how everyone from NASA to the American public thought about the space program. Only 73 seconds after liftoff, dreams of space travel became a little less romantic and a little more terrifying. And if it wasn't for that disaster, our commitment to exploring the nearest reaches of space would have been very different. The Challenger disaster happened for one ridiculously simple reason, because a series of O-ring seals were never tested in the cold. The morning of the launch, January 28, 1986, was freezing cold, which led to the failure of the seals and ultimately ripped the shuttle apart. And that brings us to the mistake. It wasn't until 2016 that NASA engineer Bob Ebling came forward after carrying his guilt for 3 decades. Ebling and 4 other engineers had been working at the time of the launch, and when they heard of the conditions the shuttle was going to launch in, they tried to stop it. They argued very accurately that the rubber seals wouldn't work in the extreme cold, that the shuttle would explode. Tragically, they were overruled by both their managers and NASA. He told NPR,
"They ruled the launch. They had their mind set on going up and proving to the world they were right and they know what they were doing, but they didn't."
In 1989, the Exxon Valdez dumped 42 million liters of crude oil into Prince William Sound, devastating the coastline for hundreds of miles. Thousands of animals died immediately, and the effects are still being felt decades later. According to research reported in Scientific American, oil that settled into the Sound's sediment has shortened the lifespan of fish, birds, and local mammals. And in 2018, Marine Insight looked at some of the farthest-reaching consequences. Tourism plummeted, more than 26,000 people had their jobs impacted, and even after $3.8 billion was poured into cleanup efforts, the oil is still there. Yes, even after decades. The majority of area species, including orcas and the Pacific herring, have never recovered and likely never will. That's a huge deal, as the Pacific herring is a cornerstone species that numerous other animals rely on for food. So why did it happen? Because the crew made some extraordinarily dumb mistakes. Captain Joseph Hazelwood was deep in alcohol-induced slumber at the time of the crash, and he'd left the ship, complete with non-functional radar, in the hands of a third mate. The third mate was absolutely not trained to take command and drove the ship right onto a reef he never saw. They were also severely undercrewed and had strayed from the normal shipping route, all compounding into a tragic disaster that changed the ecosystem forever. In 1770, James Cook claimed Australia for Britain, and we all know how well that worked out for everyone living there. He wasn't the first European to set foot in the continent, though, and if it wasn't for a stupid lack of foresight, Australia might have been a Dutch colony. According to the National Museum of Australia, Dutch explorer William Janssen was actually the first European to make recorded official contact with Australia. He landed there in 1606 on a ship that was part of the Dutch East India Company. Having spent some time along the trade routes in Asia, he was dispatched on a mission to explore a largely unknown southern landmass to see if the Dutch might be able to harvest any gold or resources there. There weren't, but there were some understandably hostile native peoples that made them think twice about the whole endeavor. Susan Broomhall, a history professor at the University of Western Australia, says not everyone thought it was a worthless piece of land. Some argued for using Australia as a stepping stone sort of colony along the Europe-Asia trade routes, and others said it was pretty much perfect for winemaking. Dutch East India Company officials weren't convinced and decided it wasn't worth the bother, and left the entire continent up for grabs.
Stop just gesturing around like they're everywhere. Are they really everywhere? Why are we here?